বাঁশিতে বিষের জ্বালা অঙ্গে হৃদে ছড়ায় আমার, ও বাঁশিতে বিষের জ্বালা অঙ্গে হৃদে ছড়ায় আমার, ও বাঁশিতে বিষের জ্বালা অঙ্গে হৃদে ছড়ায় আমার, অসুরের মায়ায় কালা সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার, সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার, ও বাঁশিতে বিষের জ্বালা অঙ্গে হৃদে ছড়ায় আমার, অসুরের মায়ায় কালা সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার, সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার, অসুরের মায়ায় কালা সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার, সব কাজ ভোলায় আমার। ভালো যদি বাসে সে আমায়, ভালো যদি বাসে সে আমায়, ও বাঁশি যেন যখন তখন না বাজায়, ও বাঁশি যেন যখন তখন না বাজায়। বল গিয়ে তার ব্যাকুল রাধা একলা ঘরে কেবল কাঁদে, বল গিয়ে তার ব্যাকুল রাধা একলা ঘরে কেবল কাঁদে, বারণ করে দে। ও বাঁশি যখন তখন অমন করে না বাজে, ও বাঁশি যখন তখন অমন করে না বাজে, চায় না কি সে নিজের মতন থাকুক রাধে, চায় না কি সে নিজের মতন থাকুক রাধে, বারণ করে দে।
And good day to all of you. I'm so pleased to be here today to welcome all of you on behalf of Vishwarang 2020, Ramanand Garge University, and from our festival director, Australia, Rekha Rajvanshi. I'm Sheba Nandkeolyar, CEO of MultiConnexions Group, immediate past chair of Australia-India Business Council, and the current chair of the Women in Business chapter. It is my privilege today indeed to moderate this amazing session today. The first of its kind, without a doubt, talking about soft power, which I believe is such a powerful tool for our business and bilateral relationship. The bilateral economic engagement has been on the rise, and there is no doubt about it. Today, the two-way goods and services trade with India was 30.3 billion in 2018-19, and the level of two-way investment is over 30 billion too. It was Mr. Simon Birmingham, Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, who said no single market offers more growth opportunity for Australian businesses than India out to 2035. The IAS 2035 strategy released by the Australian government actually placed the opportunity at 45 billion plus for trade and over 100 billion plus for Oz investments in India. So one of the most powerful tools, often overlooked, as I said just now, is soft power in business diplomacy. What is soft power? So today we're going to be talking about a topic where we have some amazing experts who are going to discuss, is going to be really about the role of soft power in creating stronger bilateral business ties between Australia and India. Before we start, let me quickly touch on soft power. Soft power was the term first introduced by Joseph Nye, who spoke about the power or the ability to influence the behavior of others to get the outcomes you want. You can do it in two ways. Either you can coerce a person to come to you, or you can incentivize or use money power to get to people to come to you, or you can actually subtly really influence their behavior to the outcomes that you want without coercion. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. And that's the soft power. Now, Naya actually had three pillars which he outlined as soft power: the political values, culture, and foreign policy. And under these three pillars, we have host of facets, whether it's education, sports, arts, culture, entertainment, relationships, media, communication, heritage. The list goes on and on, really. With me today, there are four speakers, four stalwarts from the industry and government who need no introduction in Australia. They're extremely well known. However, for our overseas visitors, let me briefly introduce them. And as soon as I introduce them, we'll kick off the discussions. So with us here we have, please welcome Mr. Ramanand Garge, Director, Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center. He's from the Consulate General of India, Sydney. We have Mr. Dipen Rughani, CEO, Newland Global Group, and the former national chairman of AIBC. In fact, Dipen and myself, when we were a part of the national leadership team, actually had the opportunity to host Prime Minister Modi when he came to Australia in 2014, Dipen, if you remember that. And also we have with us Charles Thomson, Aka Bihari Lal, part-time journalist and actor in India. And, he's been very humble because I asked them to give me their designations. He's a lot more than that, and you'll hear from him. We have, of course, our absolute genius with us here, Irfan. Irfan is the AIBC National Chair for Startups and Innovation. He's a co-founder and director of INQ India, UAE, and Australia, and also the director of Startup Australia Foundation. So thank you very much to all our panel speakers for being here with us today. So what I might do would be to kind of kick off the discussion straight away. And perhaps, Ramanandji, I might get you to come in, and then every one of you, maybe after Mr. Ramanandji, might invite Dipen and then Charles and Irfan to quickly give us and was your view about soft power, perhaps in 2 minutes each.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Shivaji, for this wonderful introduction and creating a brief background. Before I start, I would like to wish all the viewers and all the authorities and all my co-panelists and chair a happy Diwali, which is likely to come in around the corner, and best wishes on behalf of Consulate General of India in Sydney. And when it comes to the soft power, I feel it is one of the element of country's ability comprised of it's the element in the form of its legacy, which is created in the form of its culture, value set, and related other various facets that truly defines or gives an identity to certain either the state or a nation for that matter in the very theoretical terms when it comes to say. But while studying various norms and facets of civilization, I personally realized that it is a very unique tool available for the state to preserve its legacy and bridge it with future while evolving with the value addition of the present. So when you're talking of evolution of any form, as a culture or any political or foreign policy for that matter, I guess this is how this flows on these lines. This is my personal observation. And when it comes to the bilateral terms, I feel this is one of the major prominent element between of bilateral relation between India and Australia, and none other than the chair can truly stand testimony to the way she has seen the transformation of bilateral relation, and most of the aspects she's also contributing very significantly to it. So that is there. Then when it comes to the diverse country like India, I feel every state has its uniqueness, and that diversity combining together and presenting on a global canvas itself is an attracting ability, and that's the reason many people or many travelers, be it foodies, be it clothing and textile or anything, everybody feels that if you haven't visited to India, your life is not complete. Thank you.
So true, so true. Thank you so much, Ramanand. I might bring Dipen in. Dipen, if you could share your thinking on what you believe constitutes soft power.
Sheba, thank you very much. And again, I echo the gratitude of the introductions you made this, for this event. Thank you. One of the biggest soft powers within Australia is that we recognize the traditional owners of the grounds that we're gathered and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land that we're gathered. In my view, Sheba, you know, I've done a little bit of work in this in the past, and I believe that soft power rests on the ability to shape, as you said earlier, the preferences of others, right? And it's our capacity or the capacity of a nation to lead by example, and the ability to attract and co-opt people and nations rather than to coerce them. And I think coercing people or nations, as you can see in today's sort of globalized or new norms, if you want to call it that, isn't working. And they're using intangible resources of culture and ideology and institutional norms. Soft power in our sort of is our capacity to reach beyond the negotiations between governments and the transactions of traders and to tell a story about who we are, you know, what inspires us and what we seek to be as an individual or as a nation. You know? Such stories can actually reflect on the diversities that we represent and the values that we place on our democracy. This is really important, again, in today's environment that we're all sort of encountering. For me, to be honest, I'm really particularly fascinated in smart power. And that is a combination of hard and soft power. And what that means is this is going to help us advance Australia's global reputation and prosperity. And this is what we aim to do sitting here in Australia, is how we're going to connect Australia and India, how we're going to utilize Australia's strengths to look at assisting India's aspirations. And for me, smart power is the way to go, the combination of both soft and hard power. You know, for Australia, our strengths include our economy. I mean, of course, today with COVID situation, the economy is a little bit dented, but it still is a very, very strong, it's a strength for us. Our multicultural society, our world-class education systems, our sporting prowess. You know, we have some, we kick beyond our means when it comes to sports, as well as our attractive lifestyle. And you can see that today, when you're looking around the world, that Australia has done tremendously well in I guess, the way it's approached the COVID situation. But we're lucky to have such a beautiful country and such an attractive lifestyle. Our values, our culture, and of course, our reputation as a reliable partner, a trusted friend, and a nation that is friendly and enterprising people, which sort of blend all to make us a wonderful country and a wonderful partner. And this is where I believe that Australia, India can really converge.
Thank you. And that was excellent. And I love the fact that you spoke about smart power, which is really a combination of soft power and the harder aspects of how to get an outcome happening. I might move on to Charles. Charles, may I invite you to share your thinking on what you believe reflects soft power?
Certainly. Firstly, as a fourth generation Australian, I'd like to say good day. Then namaste, ram ram, and salam. Given that we're talking about both Bharat and Australia, I think what's fascinating here when we talk about soft power, we're actually talking about cultural diplomacy. And what's amazing is if you look at a country like Australia, by default, its cultural diplomacy has been so good, unbeknown to itself, that from every nation on the planet, there is somebody wanting to migrate here. And we're a very new country, apart from our first citizens, and that's made it quite a magic country. Now, what's also quite amazing is then when you look on the other side in a country like Bharat. In Bharat, Australia, just by default, through its cultural diplomacy of sport and even now food, which is quite amazing, is well known. You can go into any village of India and every young kid knows this term Australia. Now, also, the other part of this is Bharat or India. And what's interesting there, which I find, is by default, and this has happened over many years, although now the lines are blurring. If you talk to a typical Aussie who's born here of a couple of generations, they all have somebody who's been to India. Why? They've gone to Rishikesh, they've gone to learn yoga, they've gone to learn Ayurveda, they've gone to learn something about the culture of India. And this has been going on for 30 or 40 years in a very dynamic way. What I love about this conversation that we're having today is now we're looking at how these two countries are coming together through their cultural connections. And it's quite amazing. And of course, I just finish with this thought. The great contribution now that the new highly skilled migrants from India are now contributing to Australia. You cannot participate in any workplace or go anywhere in Australia without meeting an Indian Aussie. So there's a huge relevance here for Australia to understand and appreciate, and I think for both countries to connect. It's happened by default for many, many years, but now, and this is an evidence of a seminar like this, we're now starting to focus and look a little bit more carefully at what the strong connections are between these two amazing countries.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was amazing. And thank you for touching on Indian diaspora, because if you remember, all of us have read the Indian Economic Strategy 2035, which actually highlights diaspora to be able to play a very key role in bringing these two nations together, especially in terms of the business ties too. So over to you, Irfan, for your thinking on this matter.
Thank you, Sheba, and really appreciate your introduction and having curated this great program with the amazing, eminent speakers and panelists. And I'm privileged to be part of this panel and hearing you all. I think I'm just going to resonate. The things just been shared, they all resonate well and all touch closely on the soft power to deliver an outcome. I want to take the cue that you shared around the role of diaspora, and what comes to my mind is when the Honorable President Indian President visited us here in Australia, and this still resonates. The role of the diaspora is to be a living bridge, and that again is a soft power, being reinforced. That our cross-cultural connect that we have. So this is a whole, an area by itself as an MBA student or a graduate. When you talk about cross-cultural marketing, cross-cultural, business, this bilateral trade, being cognizant of cross-cultural, elements that make it tick. And this is a broader term that make it tick, bit of an Aussie version. But we need to be aware of what makes things happen. And here, for that, you need to be cognizant of what are those cross-cultural elements as well. And it is very true in the sector that I'm focused in, startup and innovation ecosystem, where as startup founders, you curate certain things and you have a certain vision and perspective of how you want to achieve. But as you think about scaling, as you think about global market access or global scaling, especially from Australia to India or India to Australia, you need to be cognizant beyond your own realm. And this is where, from my perspective, soft power, especially in a startup world, is a collective startup. Soft power is what is very powerful. And what we do is when we curate founders of a team or a startup, we really try and bring in those elements of a collective soft power that brings the diverse capability, and then we are able to use that collective soft power and target fit for purpose use of it or application to deliver or achieve those outcomes. And this is very profound, of course, in the startup world, but it goes without saying in any other world as well. It's great that we've got various cultural elements, especially being a multicultural, society, the fabric being a multicultural society, both in Australia and India. And what I've also realized is, and being a first-generation migrant as well myself, as you evolve with your engagement with the local community, you tend to realize this whole diversity, and your feeling of being a global citizen really drives you to aspire and reach out to okay, I can help this Australian business in India because I've had that cultural connect. Whilst we are Australian citizens here, still our heart beats for India. We know how to, traverse or, maneuver through the dynamics there, establish that connect, and make outcomes happen. So those things do come out strongly. And that's something which we try and reinforce as we influence bilateral trade and business outcomes as well. In the startup space, that's quite profound. And as naturally the Australian startups think about US or UK as their next market, we're trying to steer them towards India. And that's where, awareness and creating that, view of how to do business in India and how to expand, how to work with the dynamics there, that software has a great role to play. That's where I want to start off with. Thank you, Sheba.
Thank you, Irfan. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And you could not have, expressed it better when, as you said, the President of India visited us, and the first thing he said was, "Role of diaspora is a living bridge." It is absolutely so perfect. Now, let me come into another question, and would love to hear perhaps Dipen's views on this first. And this is recently there has been a big boost to the Australia's soft power, I believe, in terms of the influx of international students that we've had. And, if you look at what the international students have done, not just from India, but across all over the world, wherever they've come from, but primarily a lot from India to today, is they've added billions of dollars in cash to our university funds, but in Australian university funds. But more importantly, I do believe they've also added to the Australian power ledger. So would you like to comment on that, Dipen? And once Dipen finishes, I'd like perhaps Irfan to quickly come and comment on this. Dipen, you're on mute. Dipen, you're on mute.
How's that? Thank you, Sheba. Sorry about that. Okay. Yes, look, you started off your introductions with the India economic strategy to 2035, and the priority sector by far in that report is the education sector. And yes, it does definitely create billions of dollars worth of revenue for the country. I think it's the third largest income earner for Australia. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to also to realize that the variety of students that come from around the world, it adds so much to Australia's ecosystem, its culture, and so on. And I've always believed that along with like the market and consumer focus to business strategies within these universities, and Australia as a whole, it's critical to have a cultural focus also. Now, social and cultural trends are fast changing as new students are coming from various parts of the country. And even if you look at Indian students that are coming to Australia, they're already quite well versed in Western culture, right? Because they're bombarded with TV and the internet and so on. So the social and cultural trends are fast changing. And it's important to understand, also reflect and integrate with these changes. And the students are doing so as they come into Australia. I think also assimilation and trust is right at the core of all of this. Like if you've got to be able to assimilate, and you've got to have some faith and some trust in not only the country that you're visiting, but also in the people that are actually coming here, the young students that are actually coming here to study. Now, international students really add that cultural narrative to Australia, along with the business terms and of the enrollment and all that sort of stuff. So they bring that component like of greater engagement and understanding, and they also sort of bring in, they're probably our best sort of cultural ambassadors abroad, you know. These are people who can share their stories of warmth and richness and of their culture. You know, when they study here in Australia, things like food, art, you know, culture, family values, histories, and so on. So I think that there's so much to be gained from international students coming here. And I think there's a lot more work to be done there, particularly in that soft power perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dipen. And Irfan, a quick 1 minute from you.
I think I'll just touch on 3 quick points. One, have worked with the international students for the last 20 years here in Australia. Phenomenal to see the drive and the influx and growing influx of students still aspiring. The key thing I want to give them, talk on or reflect is I've seen more and more students take up internship program. And I think that's a no-brainer part of blending into the community, whether it's a not-for-profit organization or a for-profit entity or corporate or even a startup, blending into the business or an organizational setup and knowing about the culture of business in Australia and also actively contributing to how you could assist or the person could assist scaling globally. That's a no-brainer. Everyone should aspire, and that's definitely going to create a lot of impact. The second thing is the new Colombo plan that Australia has got. We want to see more Australian students and business associates being there in India and across the region to build that cultural bridge and know how to do business better, and for them to also associate locally as well. So that's definitely two key things that I would want to reflect on as well. And then I can see a lot more people, students are coming, just not aspiring to just do education and try for a job. They're looking to embark on the entrepreneurial journey as well. And that's where I'm really excited that the whole startup innovation ecosystem is also, you had a lot of first generation migrants who have gone on to be a startup founder and being successful. So that entrepreneurial mindset as well is playing out the big time with the new students that we are seeing. So that's great to see part of the soft power being influenced here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Irfan. I might move on to another question, which I thought I'd really like Ramanandji's thinking and Charles. And this is about multiculturalism, culture, and the Indian diaspora. So very often these are facets of soft power. And I'd really like to, and India has an abundance of this, no doubt, including Australia. Australia is a very multicultural country too. So how do you think these facets can contribute to the bilateral business relationship? Ramanandji, from you?
Shivaji, thank you very much for this question. As you mentioned about the multiculturalism, or in India we call it as a cultural diversity.
Yeah.
I guess these are the natural social characters of both the societies, which brings them together. And adds to that, Indian diaspora, which is very prominent in Australia, also worked as an enabling factor to bridge as a relation of friendship between both the countries. And simultaneously, when it comes to the cultural aspect, I feel this people-to-people connect also create a greater level of comfort between both the countries to initiate dialogue and greater engagements. I would say that the recent, not only the high-level visits of both the countries in either of the countries stands testimony to it, but the level of warmth is shown in both the relations. Like even the recently, you may all recollect, Honorable Prime Minister of Australia has prepared some of the wonderful Indian dishes and shared on his social media platform, and was immediately complimented from the Indian Prime Minister. And their virtual summit also is one of the classic summit example of this warmth, which is shown reflecting the relations of both the countries. But when it comes to the development of that warmth, I feel the diaspora as one of the prominent enabling factor, which has literally created a niche for itself by their passionate dedication and devotion, and being the one of the major element of multiculturalism in Australia, and has contributed very constructively for the comprehensive development of Australia here. So that organic bridge, I feel that becomes a very natural enabling factor of strengthening bilateral relationship between India and Australia.
Thank you, Ramanandji. And I might come to Charles. What about you? You're on mute, Charles.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's okay. You can hear me now?
Yeah, very well.
Okay, I'd like to address that, but I'd also like to address an issue that we didn't really address in our last question, and that's about Australian students. I've spent a lot of time in India, and I actually worked in a financial services company that started from a garage that's now doing $300-400 million US a month, and it's the largest tatkal outside the banks in India that was supported by the Gates Foundation in the beginning because of the work it was doing with the poor. And one of the things that happened was our connection with the Americans. Now, this is a leaf where I think Australia can take. Everybody bags the Americans, but sometimes they do things sometimes very well. One of the things that they do in India is that the embassies and the consulates keep a list of all the most amazing new entrepreneurial companies on the ground. So before a visiting dignitary from the United States, whether it's just like we have a Reserve Bank governor in Australia, or in my case, it was Timothy Gartner, he's given a list of 20 extraordinary, unusual companies, and he can pick one. So he picked us. And now what happened was, and what happens regularly is, if you look, because of this people-to-people contact, business between Australia and India is not only strong, but now you'll see in the upper echelons of all the big companies, and especially innovation in the United States, you'll find Indians. Now, what also happened with that was, you'd be surprised to know that Harvard University students, Cambridge, any of the big universities, they regularly go to India and visit on the ground. I was able to encourage one of the Australian professors to get students who are doing MBA at Melbourne University to do a visit. But for us to go forward, it would be amazing if all of our premier universities in their MBA courses at some point of time took their students for a one-off trip to India to meet some of these companies which are growing exponentially from the bottom up. And that's something the Americans have done for years, and they've done it so well. Now, tell me a company in America that doesn't have some Indian genius in it. And this is because of this cross-to-cross thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in Australia, we have still been very colloquial in our outlook and everything. We may get all these wonderful overseas students in our universities, but we still haven't got that global perspective, which is really, really important. There are some universities that are breaking the mold and they're doing very well, but it'd be wonderful to see all of the major universities to go down this path. And I think that'd be extremely helpful for Australia in the long term.
Thank you so much. Now, I was just wondering, because this discussion is really heating up really well. And I do believe that especially our viewers would really benefit with a little bit more time from you. Are you okay to spend another 10 minutes? Because then we can really wrap up and pass on what we believe our best practice tools could be. Are you everyone okay for another 10 minutes? Excellent. Thank you so much. So now to really wrap up, I think it would be great. And if we could start with you, Ramanandji, where if you could tell me your top 3 soft power tools you believe will make that difference, facilitate change, and really impact positively the bilateral business relationship between Australia and India. Your top 3, tips or tools, whatever you might want to call it.
3 sectors, if you want me to identify, or
yeah, you can tell me that these are the 3 soft power sectors, or these are the 3 soft power facets, or these are the 3 soft power ways in which we can, whatever you want to choose, it's
okay,
yours.
I feel yoga and Ayurveda is one of the major aspect, which has, especially in the present COVID-19 situation, has when the world is introspecting on the overall lifestyle pattern, it has emerged as one of the major boost, and in a very proactive manner. Secondly, when it comes to the art and culture, I feel craftsmanship. And in India, when it comes to the diverse pattern of being in various aspects of craftsmanship, right from the its sculptures and to the various patterns in textiles and all jewelries and everything. So that craftsmanship, if it is preserved and again developed with the help of modern advanced technology, that is another sector I feel. And thirdly is a tourism, because both the countries, India and Australia, blessed with wonderful natural sites. Add to that is multicultural element to it, so that becomes a very classic destinations. So these three sectors I would like to highlight, which can be further when it comes to the people-to-people diplomacy. When people talk more on these elements, I feel it will add another strength to the overall bilateral relations.
This is perfect. This is exactly what we are looking for in terms of your three powerful software tools. When we talk about tools, we're getting more specific now. So Dipen, over to you, your three best tools.
Sheba, thank you. Sheba, I'd like to mention the three tools, but I also want to mention a couple of points at the end of that, if you don't mind. I'll be as quick as possible. So throughout this conversation, we've talked about food diplomacy and cuisine. You know, both prime ministers were discussing samosas and curry and khichdi. So I think food diplomacy is very important. Amazon India has launched, an Australian store. Simon Birmingham also launched the Taste of Australia. To promote Australian food products there. We've got Australian MasterChef has the highest viewership from India. So that's one, I think, that is very important. Secondly, I think sports and cultural exchanges, festivals like Confluence are very, very important in Australia. And as Irfan pointed out earlier, the diaspora, the living bridge between the two nations, these are the three areas I think are important for us to build on and continue to build on. I think that also we need to focus on how we're going to get this done. What happens? All of these sectors are really good. So we need to look at social engineering and cultural connect, which is integral to becoming dependable partners. And we need to recognize the contradictions and deal with the diversities between the two countries, right?
Fabulous.
And these are the things that I think we need to look at. I've got some more, but I think we're running out of time, so I'll let it be.
Well, thank you. But you have captured the three most important, definitely, diaspora, food, social engineering, and social cultural connections. So important. I might move on to Charles. And I can see Rekha has also joined us. Welcome, Rekha. And Charles, over to you for your top three. You're on mute, Charles. You're on mute. Yep. No.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I agree with the three topics that have been chosen, which is basically health and well-being, innovation, and tourism. They're three. I think if we're talking about Australia, we have to get a lot smarter. Going to India and spending millions of dollars and advertising that when you come to Australia, all you're going to eat is seafood is not going to work. I see this in India myself. I understand our heart is in the right place when we're trying to promote products, but we have to be cultural sensitive. Trying to tell Indians that they've got to drink wine when they come to Australia. Of course, there are people who drink wine, and of course, there's a booming wine industry in India. But there's also a very large group of people who would come to Australia if they realized that their dietary needs would be met. I mean, it always fascinates me, even here in Australia, when I have a conversation with my Indian Aussies and I tell them I'm vegetarian and they scratch their head. They think that's just something that happens in India. So this cultural sensitivity is extremely important.
Very
Australia,
good.
not just with India, we have our foot in our mouth everywhere we go. I'll give you a perfect example. Go to the Australian High Commission in New Delhi and order a cup of tea. You can't get it. but you can get you can get beer. That's it. We sell beer. Now, I understand our Aussies are missing Australia, but look after the locals too. So I think on that side, for Australia, you know, we've got to be more cultural sensitive. From the Indian perspective, India has the biggest and best potential for tourism on the planet. And there are wonderful examples of this. They only need to go to a country like Thailand and see how well they develop their tourism sector to be 15% of their economy. There is, you know, I bang my head on the wall when I speak to people both in India and in Australia, and they've never traveled in India. I mean, never been to Sikkim, never been to Ladakh, right? And they may be the tourism people who are doing the promotion. So on India's side, tourism is massive, but connectivity has to be there. And it can't be just the 5-star market, the Taj and the Oberois. We've got to look at middle-class people and that connection. So, you know, once again, this is a cultural connection. And then, of course, the last thing that I just quickly make, innovation. The amount of youth with brilliant ideas and who now, with the power of the mobile phone, are creating mini, you know, Googles in India. Australia needs to connect with that. It's really, really important. If we want to be ahead in the world and we want to go further, we need to connect with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. That's amazing. And I cannot, you know, agree with you more when I think, I mean, you're called Bihari Lal, right? Because you are part of Bihar. And I thought, yes, I cannot.
होता है मैं हिंदी नहीं बोला आप थोड़े से हिंदी बोलता है देखो पूरा लोग भी हिंदी बोलता है ऐसा
बोलना चाहिए हिंदी हम लोग को बोलना चाहिए बिहार में इतने सारे अच्छे आर्ट्स एंड क्राफ्ट्स हैं from starting from the paintings and, you know, those old style Krishna and other engravings, and yet nobody knows much about them. You know, it's just amazing. So you are absolutely right. Instead of just people heading to see the Taj Mahal and Agra, to really discover all those states that have so much of rich heritage that's there. I might, for sake of time, move on quickly to Irfan. Irfan, your top three?
Whilst I would start on a high level, taking a cue from what Dr. Peter Varghese had mentioned about doing business, you know, preparation, partnership, and patience, and then I added a passion to it. But going down to a bit more specific tools in my world of startup and innovation, which I live and breathe in. And Charles, thanks for reflecting on that as enormous amount of innovation, what we have in frugal innovation, you know, jugaad innovation happening. And that's a lot for Australian startup ecosystem and businesses to tap in as well. What I want to just leave a thought, both sides, and more so in India as well, to use the power of digital networks. So LinkedIn and any other social networks, reach out. So reach out because you stand to lose nothing. So actively reaching out to establish those networks, because in the startup or even in the business trade space, it's about the power of, as I said, the collective soft power of your network really plays a crucial role. It's not only what you can do, but also what through your network, your advisory, your mentors that you can achieve. So if you can establish those powerful bridges in terms of your networks that you can establish and work with key influencers, which is another key element of any trade and business. That's another key takeaway I'll leave for this forum. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Irfan. Before I sum up, we have Rekha with us. Rekha, would you like to come on and welcome everyone for a quick minute? Rekha, you're on mute.
Hello. Yes, I would like to thank everyone from Vishwarang, Australia.
Rekha, if I can just hold on for a minute. So
yes,
to introduce Rekha Rajvanshi to all our viewers here in India and Australia, Rekha is the Festival Director Australia of this festival that we are representing today, which is the Vishwarang 2020. Over to you, Rekha.
Yeah, I would welcome all of you and thank you all for participating in this panel. And special thanks to Sheba for managing it, moderating it, and Dipen, Irfan, Charles and our director, Ramanand Garge. Thank you so much for being here. And it was very creative, positive conversation. I would again thank you all. And I hope we can organize more festivals and more panel discussions like this in the future.
Thank you, Rekha. And that then brings us to the end of our event. And I'd just quickly like to conclude. First of all and foremost, my thank you to Rekha Rajvanshi, who's the festival director from Australia. Pawan Luthra, who's the founder and CEO of Indian Link Media Group, who's also the exclusive partner, Australia media partner, for actually picking this topic, which really pleased me a lot. Two speakers, Dipen, Irfan, Charles, and Ramanandji, very, because I know that each and every one of you are very, very busy people. To pull out this kind of a time and to spend this kind of time is really very, very appreciated. More so because your insights are going to actually guide the relationship going forward. And this, as I said, is the first time ever we've had a discussion on soft power. So that really is quite unique in its own. There's a few things that I thought I might just share in the wrap up is that cultural diplomacy definitely is very important. Cultural sensitivity came out, yoga, holistic education, holistic health, all these things are definitely important, as also sports, education, entrepreneurship, youth power. And I want to come back again to education and diaspora, because personally, from my perspective, I do believe that these two are going to play a very, very important role in going forward. Diaspora, as the President of India said, Irfan rightfully pointed out, that they are the living bridge between the two countries. And no one understands the culture and the unique possibilities or positivities that both these countries represent as a diaspora does, you know. So I believe that diaspora is going to and should continue to play a very important role. The second one, definitely education and international students. And thank you, Irfan, again, of pointing out, as also so many of you spoke, including Dipen yourself, about international students. And with international students, I really do believe we need to go much deeper. This is really our informal ambassadors. When they go back, they have experienced Australia, and to be able to tap on them from the Australian government perspective is going to be important. From the Australian industry perspective is going to be important. Don't just let them go off. You know, keep in touch with them, build that alumni, and they are your best brand ambassadors. I was a part of the DFAT board where I did attend some of the new Colombo plan programs and events happening in India. And I was so amazed to find the majority, coming back to entrepreneurship, the majority of the entrepreneurs in the bilateral space are actually international students who studied in Australia. So how good is that? Number two, I think also the Australian government is doing a lot. And again, fortunately for me, I was part of the board of the NCP, New Colombo Plan, where, you know, students have been given, Australian students have been given this opportunity by DFAT to go overseas and build their Asian cultural competency. And this is amazing because I met a lawyer Australian lawyer who went, he was studying law, and he had gone and worked in Bangalore in one of the Indian law firms. And the first thing he asked me, and this is in front of the foreign minister, was actually standing right there, saying, Sheba, can you get me a job in an Indian law firm? I would love to spend my next 2 to 3 years there. How good is that? So I do believe that young people, they are our absolute, you know, they are our future. And the more we can actually work with youth, the more we can work through education, entrepreneurship, startups, programs, culture, sensitivity, all these really can come together to make things happen, rather than pushing them through hard power and coercing them that you must go and invest in India or come to Australia. And that kind of really sums up, but before I go, We know that Diwali is coming around, and Ramanandji already wished everybody a happy Diwali. I would also like to wish a very happy Diwali, not just to our panel speakers, but also to all our viewers in India and Australia. On behalf of myself, Rekha Rajvanshi, the Australian Festival Director, and all of us here in Australia, a very happy Diwali to you as we end the program today. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, friends. My name is Rekha Rajvanshi, and I'm in the studio here with three renowned authors of Sydney. They have made a significant contribution to literature and also have won many awards. Let me introduce you to them. So, next to me is Nim. Nim is an author, international speaker, and life coach specializing in leadership and communication skills. She has written 3 popular books: Unraveling Anjali, Diary of an Immigrant Bride, Unlock the Real You, and A Little Wiser, A Little Happier. She also has a YouTube channel which currently has 100 plus videos on topics exploring personal and professional development, as well as a blog, Nim's Niche, which she started in 2011. Her 4th book is scheduled to release in mid-November 2020. In the middle, we have Ben. Ben Doherty is an award-winning foreign correspondent who has worked for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Guardian in Britain. He is currently working as Pacific editor for The Guardian, and his focus is migration, refugees, and asylum seekers. Doherty has won 3 Walkley Awards, and his work is recognized by Amnesty International, the Australian Human Rights Commission, and the United Nations Association in Australia. Ben Doherty's debut novel, Nagaland, is set in the far northeast remote corner of India. Then we have Roanna Gonsalves. Roanna is originally from India, settled in Australia. She completed her PhD from the University of New South Wales. She teaches creative writing workshops within communities, schools, and universities. She is the author of The Permanent Resident, which won 2018 New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards, Multicultural New South Wales Award. Roanna also received the Prime Minister's Australia, Asia Endeavour Award. She is the co-founder and co-editor of Southern Crossings. Her short story book is The Permanent Resident, published in India as Sunita D'Souza Goes to Sydney. Welcome all 3 of you.
Thank you.
So before we start this panel discussion, I want to ask a very simple question. What motivated you to be a writer?
I'll get Roanna to start.
As a child, I was very lucky to be part of a family that encouraged me to read. And so I became a writer by being a reader first for a long time. And it is through reading that I came to writing. And, when we read really beautiful literature, there's something there that sparks us to want to write ourselves. And so I started writing really terrible, cliched poetry. But my family were very supportive and they showered me with praise. And so that combination, I think, of doing something that gives you joy, sort of writing for me, and applause from the family as a child is just a winning combination, I think, for a child. And so I decided that this is great, I want to keep doing this. And
Where were you then?
I was in Bombay. I grew up in Bombay.
Right.
Yeah, Mumbai.
How about you?
I think Roanna's right. There's something very profound for human beings about storytelling. I think we are naturally narrative creatures. We seek to make sense of our world and our universe through stories, and it's a way we connect with other people is to share stories. So I think there's something very sort of deep and innate about storytelling. Like Roanna, I was lucky enough to grow up in a household that read a lot of books. We read newspapers, and language and literature was always around. I'm a journalist, so I write for a living. But every now and then a story comes along, like Nagaland, that sort of grabbed me by the sort of scruff of the neck and said, "You have to tell me." And there's almost this compulsion, this urging to tell this story. So in some ways, you don't have a choice. You're either a writer or you're not. And if you are, you just have to do it.
Yeah, so true. Oh, I resonate with what Ben just said. In fact, I grew up in a household where language and literature abounded as well. In fact, my paternal grandmother was a noted Marathi novelist, Kumudini Rangnikar, and she's left behind a massive legacy of literature for the Marathi language. And growing up, watching her, I was always inspired. So writing was something that I think just organically grew over the years.
That's good. So, can I ask you, is your writing influenced by your own experiences? Is it autobiographical to all of you? I mean,
I wrote Diary of an Immigrant Bride, which is my first book, fiction, based on arranged marriages and, the concept of love within the framework of an arranged marriage, because I often get asked by people who are not familiar with the Indian culture, when I tell them it's an arranged marriage, they say, "Do you love your husband?" That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I wrote based on my understanding of arranged marriages, just from everything I've learned over the years, from all the people I've met. So in a way, part of my own life has found its way into the book. And I think with authors, there's always a little slice of ourselves that finds its way. Yeah.
and you've written about Nagaland. I mean,
Yeah. So yes. I mean, yes. You,
So
of
that's
course.
your novel,
That's
Nagaland.
This is Nagaland here, and this is the hornbill that is. I won't give the story away. Is central to the story. This is not an autobiographical work, but certainly. As a journalist, I suppose you're an observer all the time, and that's what sort of drew me into this story. This is a novel based on the life story of a man I knew, Augustine, who was from Nagaland, and he sort of drew me into this world of Nagaland and the mythology and the legends of that place. So I'm very conscious I'm the only non-Indian on this panel today, and writing a book about India, a place that I lived for a long time and loved deeply, but I'm not from India. I even say at the beginning of this book that I'm very much the bearer of another person's tale. I'm a messenger, and I'm a conduit to this story, essentially. This is not my story, but I'm the sort of medium through which it goes. So my situation, I think, is a little bit different.
So you lived in India for 4 years?
4 years, yeah, for 4 and a bit, yeah.
I get asked this question a lot because I write in the first person sometimes, and that can be a little bit. But to that I say that most writers draw on biography and draw from material from their own lives. But it's what you do with it, it just gets filtered through your own imagination, and that's where the magic happens. And so my work is based on certain aspects of my life, experiences I've had, overheard conversations, things in the media that I have then kind of rendered on the page, but completely in a fictionalized way. So no, then it's not really an autobiography, but definitely, there's something of the author in everything we write, whether it's a letter or a novel or
So what do you
short
do
story.
when you observe things? Do you make a note? Or
Sometimes I make notes. Sometimes they stick in your mind. Yeah.
I love what you said about overheard conversations. I think that's such a rich source of material, right, for any author. Yeah.
So, when did you move to Australia, Roanna?
In '98 as an international student.
Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Nim?
I came here in 1996, so it's been 25 years nearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Long time. Well, how about you? You were born in Australia?
I was born in Singapore, and I got to the mainland of Australia when I was 6. So when's that? 1988. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how did you decide that you are going to write about immigrant experiences in Australia, or it just happened?
No, I deliberately wanted to chronicle the experiences of Indian women in Sydney, because I felt that we don't see that aspect of contemporary Australian life in Australian literature and in the Australian art scene. It's very monocultural, but I wanted to, I guess, why we all write, we want to see ourselves represented in some way. And so that is why I wanted to write about Indians in Australia.
Most of your women are very strong in stories.
Oh, some are strong,
And,
some are very unethical. They do the wrong thing they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
But
And men have played kind of supporting role.
yes, sometimes, yes. Some of the men play supporting roles. Sometimes they're very unsupportive. Yeah, I was trying to render like the nuances of life in contemporary Sydney, especially.
So, can I ask Ben, can you tell us something about your book, Nagaland? What happens?
I'd be delighted to. So as I say, Nagaland, it's a funny book. It sort of lives in this hinterland between autobiography of Augustine, the protagonist, and the myths and the legends of the Naga people, but also the history of the Naga people, the insurgency and the difficulties that part of India has faced for a long time. When I was living in India, I met Augustine, and we fell into a very interesting friendship where he would just sort of appear in my life from time to time. And gradually he invited me up to Nagaland to his village, and I began to go and to visit and I was utterly entranced and fascinated by this place. So I had no intention of ever writing a story for a newspaper or a novel of any kind, but this was just a place I felt compelled to visit and fascinated by. So I kept visiting, and I must have gone 10 or 12 times to Nagaland, and we would walk the hills of Nagaland from village to village, meeting with people and talking. The book begins with me on my last visit to Nagaland, essentially saying goodbye to this place and saying goodbye to Augustine, knowing I wouldn't see him for a long time. And I moved back to Sydney, and I was living in Australia, and an envelope turns up in my house, and it's this battered yellow thing wrapped, as Indian packages tend to be, in lots of sticky tape, and it had a Nagaland postmark on it. And Augustine, in a moment of, I don't want to give anything away here, but in a moment of personal crisis, had sent me his diary that he carried everywhere he went and wrote absolutely everything in. A book that was incredibly valuable to him. He sent it to the only place he could think of where he knew it would be safe, and he sent it to me in Australia. And that's the beginning of the story, because in the story he writes, in the beginning, in the diary he writes, we live forever through our stories, tell ours. And basically this was this compulsion that from that moment I was obliged to write Augustine's story, and this is that.
If I may add, I've read the book, and it is brilliantly written, and Ben's grasp and understanding of the culture is absolutely amazing. So I'd highly recommend it.
You're very, very kind, Nim. You're very kind.
Your language is also quite poetic in that.
I think that's a reflection of how I felt about Nagaland and how I found Nagaland. I think it's an evocative place. It's physically beautiful. The history of the place is quite brutal in parts, and it's a place that for me at least sort of brought emotions to the surface, and perhaps that's reflected in the language.
And also tell us something about the myths and legends of Nagaland.
It's one of the things I found really interesting about Nagaland is how current and present the mythology of the Naga people are. That these are myths that are living stories that are still being told and added to and changed and shaped by current events. These are not historical stories that are just told, but they are lived experiences, and they're still very current. And it feels to me that there's a very deep truth in the stories that people choose to share with each other. It's very revealing about who people are and what they prioritise and what they believe, the stories they hold on to.
Okay. I'm sure people will find it very interesting.
I hope so.
And Nim, what made you move your writing from immigrant experiences to being a motivational speaker? It was a big change, I think.
It was, and it was quite organic as well. So when I wrote Diary of an Immigrant Bride, it's actually a search of one young woman for her self-identity. And that book led to lots of people approaching me, asking me for help finding themselves, that kind of thing, because they were, inspired by her search for.
So what happens in the story, like your novel?
Diary of an Immigrant Bride.
Yes.
It's about a young woman who migrates to Australia after an arranged marriage. And mine is an arranged marriage as well. And I understand the dual challenge that women who have arranged marriages and then who move to foreign countries have to face. Because not only are you beginning life with a man who's a complete stranger, but you're beginning that life in a country that's also completely new to you. So it is a dual dilemma. You're doubly scared. And I just wanted to explore that whole relationship, how love develops. And I truly believe that love is actually a learned skill. You learn to love someone. So it's a verb rather than a noun. That's what I always like to say. And that's really what the
You have
book's.
all the books here?
Yes. So that's
This
the baby that was just launched last year, A Little Wiser, A Little
Right.
Happier.
And
That's
this is-
Unraveling Anjali, Diary of an Immigrant Bride. And this is the second book, Unlock the Real You.
Right. So we were talking about the shift.
Yes, yes. So then it was very organic. People started approaching me and discussing their life journeys, etc. And based on stuff that I suggested, they actually started getting a lot of positive outcomes in their lives. And I thought, oh, well, this is good, So then I became an accredited life coach, etc. And then into motivational speaking. Yeah.
Roanna, when you were writing this book, did you face any challenges?
Many.
Just writing a book.
Where do I
yeah.
start? So when I first came here as an international student, I at one stage I was doing a master's in writing at UTS, and Deborah Adelaide was my teacher, and she's just the most amazing, generous teacher and brilliant writer as well, one of Australia's finest. And so I said, okay, so I'm writing a novel and I'm going to have it published by the end of this year. And she said, oh, really? That's good to know. And this was 18 years before my book came out.
Okay.
And I think that's because of
Can you show that book?
the permanent resident. And that's because it takes a long time to develop your skills as a writer, to develop the confidence, to send your work out for publication, to receive critique and feedback. And it takes a long time to read, to immerse yourself in the history of literature. It takes years and decades for that to happen. Of course, there are some people who write their books really quickly, and that's fabulous. A lot of writers do that. But I have been a slow writer for this book, and I came here, lots of family circumstances, etc. Life got in the way, as they say, with writing, and so it took me a long time before I could have a book out. Yeah, so it was a long journey, but once I'd finished writing the draft.
Did it take?
Look, writing the book, I wrote it as part of a PhD, and the other part of the PhD was a sociological study of emerging writers in India. So it took me about 4 or 5 years to write actually the manuscript, but it's really based on 18 years of observation and self-doubt, and then self-confidence and practice, as you would all agree. It just takes such a long time.
Which story is very close to your heart?
Oh, they're all my babies.
It's a bit like asking a parent.
Yeah, wish your favourite child, yeah.
Yeah, but I've got the funniest one is the skit, which is it's about writing a story, and it's about how this woman is an MBA student, but she's got the confidence now to write a story, and she's in the home of another wealthier Indian couple, and at a dinner party, and they all say, okay, read us your story, and she proceeds to read the story, but then the story gets cut down by everyone in the room who have their own suggestions on how to make it better, or how not to get attention from white Australia, basically, because they want to be seen as the good Indian immigrant. And so it's a critique of that good Indian immigrant story, but it's kind of like a funny one. But there's a lot of, they're all, I love them all. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into each of them. Yeah.
That's very nice. Ben, how long did it take for you to complete the book?
Again, it's how long? I think I reckon I wrote a first draft in maybe 9 months, 10 months, and, you know, juggling work and small children, all those sorts of things. And having not written a novel before, I thought, oh, I've just written a novel. There's my novel. I think the draft that ended up being the book is draft 17, and that's, you know, going back, and some of those were really substantial rewrites. Towards the end, we're just tinkering with bits and pieces, but the art of good writing is the art of rewriting. And I had this image, and I imagine lots of people do when they sit down to write a book for the first time, is this, it's sort of this very organic, quite beautiful experience. You sit at a trendy cafe with your coffee, and this lightning bolt of inspiration comes in the window and it just flows out the end of your fingers. And it's not like that. Some days it is like that. Some days it just flows beautifully, and some days it's just hard work, and you just graft.
Every day.
And I used to sit and I would say, I'm not getting out of this chair until there are 500 words on the page. And then you do it again the next day, and you do it again the next day, and you just, it's just keep going back and going back and going back. And you do get better at it. It does get easier. I certainly found after a while, I was much better at taking myself back to Nagaland, finding the voice again, and being in that world. I found that much easier to get in and out of. But there's a lot of work, much more work than I thought.
And Nim, how about you?
Well, the first book took me about 3 years to write, and the other two were not as painful, so it was just under a year each of them.
So you sit and write every day?
I do, a bit like what Ben says. I have a daily target of these number of words have to be done, and you know, sometimes they're not very interesting words, but it's just the discipline.
The discipline's right. Yeah, and so go to about 3.5 years to write this. So it's a long process. Yeah.
So what's in the pipeline, and new book, or you're working on a project?
Yes, I'm working on historical fiction set in the Macquarie era, so late 18th and early 19th century. It's about that period, set in India, New South Wales, and Scotland.
Right. Is it a novel or?
It's a novel. It's a novel.
How about you, sir?
I think I mentioned before that Nagaland was a story that sort of grabbed me by the shirt collars and wouldn't let me go, and insisted, you know, and even a couple of times during that sort of 3.5 years, I would say, this is not going to work. I can't do it. I can't do justice to this story. And I'd put it in a drawer and leave it for, you know, for a week or two, and then it would sort of come knocking back and tapping at me saying, you haven't told me yet. You haven't told me. So I haven't yet found another story like that. So when the next one comes, you're kind of called to write these books, and you can't avoid it. So I'm, as you mentioned in your very kind introduction, I'm a journalist by trade. So I'm writing for a newspaper every day. So I'm still writing, but there's too much work. Yes.
So how has this journey of being a writer helped you evolve as a person? You went to India, lived there, saw all that poverty and richness of culture and food and everything. Yeah, I mean, look, I lived in India and fell in love with the place, and I yearned for the excitement and the drama and the as you say, the contrast of those days. It was simply an extraordinary place to be. I think writing a novel has been really interesting from a journalistic point of view. You know, as a journalist, you know, despite what people in the White House say about fake news and these sorts of things, like we deal in facts. You know, we have bare basic facts, and we build our stories with these facts. But writing a novel, and particularly writing a novel so steeped in mythology and legend, sort of exposed me to that point I was making a little earlier about these sort of deeper truths that exist and that bind us as human beings, as people, as communities and societies. These truths that we choose to believe in that reflect who we are as people. And I think there's something very important in that. You know, the profundity, the importance of storytelling really came through to me. That stories are what binds us together and what makes us a people. That shared experience of sharing stories is really something very profound in human beings. Nim, how about you? You came here and slowly adapted to the new environment. Would you like to say something about migrating here in Australia, and then did it help you evolve as a writer or as a person?
Definitely. Just all the books that I have written and the work that I now do in coaching and motivational kind of work has given me so much insight into the human psyche And I've realized that, everyday problems are fairly universal, no matter which culture you belong to. We're all struggling with the same. And now with COVID-19, we're all in the same boat globally. So it's just given me a massive insight into how the human mind works. And I've also been a very keen student of psychology and philosophy in addition to literature. So I'm sort of trying to marry all my passions and bring them into my work.
I think all the writers are psychologists first. I don't know, but writers are humble, very truthful. What do you think, Roanna?
Yeah, I think, but the process of writing actually demands that you examine yourself first before you can bring that psychological depth to your characters. Writing fiction, I'm talking about. But so you have to be a psychologist to yourself first and be honest with yourself on the page, yes, before you can proceed further. That has been my experience.
I hear, Rekha ji, that you're a noted poet
Yes,
yourself.
absolutely.
So tell us about your psychology, passion for understanding the human
I won't say much about me, but yes, I think all of us go through the same process.
Yeah.
I write in Hindi, so my work, detailed work. So that's what it is. Yeah. So I remember reading something in your book. You gave so many similes to black as. Would you like to read that
Really?
a little bit? Just
Okay.
that is the best
Sure.
part of your writing, I thought. And also I will say Ben and Nim to pick a paragraph from your book and read it to our audience.
Sure. So this is it's part of the last story called The Permanent Resident, and it's it's at a point in the story where something terrible has happened, and then there's something good that happens, and there's the main character who's not me, but who is a fictional character speaking in the first person, and talking about someone who has just asked her a question, the love interest, basically. And what I was trying to do here was to, I guess, detach the idea of blackness from evil, and detach the idea of blackness from mediocrity and from impurity, and to kind of endow the word black with beauty and other aspects of, things that are not evil and impure. And so I'll just read that. So she's talking about someone's eyes, and she says, his eyes are black, black like comfort, black like sophistication, black like peak hour in Melbourne, black like a road sign that saves, black like quality coffee, black like a crossing, black like a shape, black like taste, black like speed, black like a whir, black like money, black like oil, black like a welcomed numbness, black like a board, black like the seeds of a photograph, black like a forest that shelters, black like a hideaway that protects, black like a mailbox with no bills in it, black like floorboards polished for compliments, black like a swan on the Derwent, black like laughter in the face of cruelty, black like a cleansing smoke ceremony, black like roads that guide and surprise, black like the hair of youth, black like accentuation, black like making a mark, black like burning rubber, black like the magic of space, black like stability, black like earth, black like fertility, black like worm castings, black like prestige, black like wisdom, black like formlessness, black like shade, black like safety, black like a reassuring shadow, black like relief when it all adds up, black like a bark that holds a tree together, black like the shine of the Cook's River after dinner, black like going back to where we came from, black like there are thrilling dawns to come. So that's the riff on blackness. Thank you.
I would. Let me find.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Augustine's father has been very unwell for a long time, and his family is called to his bedside. A week later, the monsoon storms arrived. It rained constantly and the sky was dark and menacing. It was Luke's birthday, his 33rd, but the anniversary was barely noticed. 2 days later, it was time. Luke knew what was happening. He wanted to be brave for his 2 sons, the proud Naga warrior meeting his destiny unafraid. But his eyes gave it away. They were animated again. Augustine could see, but this time by fear. The family was in the room, standing silently by the bed. No one had told them, but they all somehow knew. Augustine wanted to tell his father that he was not alone, that they were there with him, but he knew that that was not true. To die is the ultimate isolation, and Luke's loneliness reached across his face. Luke's bony riven hand held Liko's smooth one. Augustine rested his palm on his father's forearm. Alex's hand was next to his brother's. On the other side of the bed, Augustine's Ai sat with Maitonfi, her chubby, blooming grandchild, in painful contrast to her gaunt, decaying son. Gusts of wind pushed an occasional spray of rain onto Luke's face, but he didn't want the window closed or the blind drawn. He gazed at the dark hills outside. Barely above a whisper, Luke had a final song. Ai sang with him. Lightning and thunder of the sky is my father, my creator. The gloomy dark below is my mother, my creator. Today I will proclaim my grief. Lightning, please help me now that I go.
Very emotional. Beautiful. Nim.
So I'm just going to read a passage. This is a diary written by the protagonist, and finally she always wanted to have a love marriage and ends up having an arranged marriage. So this is something she wrote in her diary her thoughts before marriage. I was 17 when I made the decision. I would only ever marry for true love, nothing less. Around the time I was growing up in the late 1980s in Mumbai, an arranged marriage was the ultimate goal for any middle-class girl over the age of 20. The scenario was standard and fairly predictable. A nervous young man and his smiling parents would arrive at the home of the potential bride. They would be greeted and gushed over by the girl's family, who would then proceed to praise their daughter's innumerable skills. These skills included expertise in sewing, knitting, embroidery, painting, cooking, singing, homemaking, flower arranging, reciting passages from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, quoting Wordsworth and Shakespeare, just to name a few. It didn't matter if the bride in question could not sew a button or hum a tune or tell the difference between a sonnet and a limerick. Why let facts stand in the way of a good story? As soon as the groom's family was convinced that a goddess was about to descend upon them, the bride was beckoned into the room. Inevitably, she would be led in, held firmly at the elbow by a female member of the household, as though she was in peril of collapsing if allowed to walk alone. She would arrive, head bowed, eyes lowered, sari-clad, carrying the signature tray of teacups that trembled in her hands.
So true.
Yeah.
That's what happens. Do you have any advice for emerging writers? That's the last question.
The only advice is read as much as you can and write as much as you can and support other writers.
Yeah.
That's the only advice
I would concur wholeheartedly. It's like anything, great penis to great penis because they play the piano a lot. Good writers write and just write and write and write.
I think it is a talent gifted.
Certainly, some people have a gift for it and find it easier than others, but I think everybody benefits from practice and everybody benefits from doing it over and over again.
How about you, Nim? What do you think? It can be taught? Is that
Definitely. What I'd encourage aspiring writers is to remember not to micromanage their project, because we have this internal critic that pipes up after we write one sentence and we think this is bad and we try to keep editing it. So I would suggest, macro manage it, write the whole thing and then go back to edit it.
All right. I hope my audience will be listening to your advice. They will enjoy it, and they must have enjoyed it. And thank you to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank
It's been
you.
great fun.